By noon, the whole street was watching me load my life into the back of a borrowed pickup truck, but only one person saw the truth I was trying to hide. Across the fence, behind a curtain that moved like a nervous breath, my quiet neighbor stood with a bruised heart in her eyes, and when I laughed through my own pain and said, "I told my neighbor come with me as a joke," she said okay before I finished the sentence. Before this story continues, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the kind of miracles that begin with one simple yes. My name is Armin Voss, and that morning began like the end of everything. The sun was bright over the small town of Belro, too bright for a man losing his home, his marriage, and the last pieces of dignity he had been carrying around like broken glass in his pockets. My wife had left 3 months earlier, not with screaming or slammed doors, but with a quiet note on the kitchen table saying she was tired of living beside someone who had forgotten how to feel. Maybe she was right. After my father died, after the repair shop failed, after bills began arriving like threats, I became a man who woke up angry and went to bed silent. That day, I was packing what remained of my life because the bank had taken the house, and by sunset, I had nowhere permanent to go except a half-empty hunting cabin 2 towns away that belonged to an old friend. The neighborhood looked peaceful in that cruel way the world does when your own life is collapsing. Children rode bicycles under the sunlight. A woman watered roses. Somewhere, someone was grilling lunch. I carried boxes labeled kitchen, tools, winter clothes, and memories I did not want to open. Then I saw her, Mara Aloan, my neighbor of 5 years, standing on her porch in a faded yellow dress, her hands folded tightly at her waist. She was known as the Quiet Widow on Rowan Street, though no one really knew whether she was widowed, abandoned, or simply alone. She kept her garden neat, fed stray cats, and spoke so softly that people often talked over her. I had borrowed sugar from her once, fixed her gate twice, and never asked why she flinched whenever a car door slammed. By afternoon, my truck was nearly full. I was exhausted, embarrassed, and desperate to pretend I was still in control. Mara came closer, holding a brown paper bag with 2 sandwiches and apples inside, as if feeding a ruined man could stop him from falling apart. I tried to smile and said something foolish, something meant to sound light. I told her she should come with me, said she could escape this nosy street and live in the woods with a washed-up mechanic and a leaking roof. I meant it as a joke, but before I even finished, Mara said okay. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just one small word, but it landed between us like thunder. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Then I noticed the small suitcase behind her legs. I noticed the red mark near her wrist, half hidden under her sleeve. I noticed how she looked not at me, but past me, toward the blue house beside hers where her brother-in-law, Cauldron Pike, often parked his black sedan and watched her porch like he owned her shadow. In that moment, my own troubles shrank. I was losing a house. Mara was trying to escape a life. She told me she had been waiting for a sign, any sign, even a joke from a broken neighbor with nowhere to go. We left at 2 in the afternoon, under a sky so blue it almost felt impossible to suffer beneath it. Mara climbed into the passenger seat with her suitcase on her lap, and neither of us spoke for the first 10 miles. The truck rattled, the radio played old songs through static, and every time a car came too close behind us, Mara's fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. I wanted to ask everything, but pain has a language, and sometimes silence is the only mercy it understands. Finally, near a field of sunflowers turning their faces toward the light, she told me her husband had died 2 years before, leaving debts she never knew about and relatives who blamed her for surviving him. Cauldron had moved nearby to help, but help became control became threats, and threats became a cage no one else could see. I expected her to cry, but she did not. She spoke like someone reading weather from a newspaper, calm because panic had already burned through her long ago. I kept both hands on the wheel and felt shame crawling up my throat. For 5 years, she had lived across from me, and I had never truly seen her. I had been too busy drowning to notice someone else sinking. When we reached the cabin road, gravel cracking under the tires, Mara looked out at the pine trees and whispered that she had forgotten the world could be this wide in daylight. The cabin was worse than I remembered. Dust on the windows. A sagging porch. One bed, one old sofa, a kitchen sink that groaned before giving water. I apologized, but Mara stepped inside like it was a palace. Sunlight poured through the dirty windows and painted gold across the wooden floor. She opened one window, breathed in the smell of pine, and smiled for the first time. Not a polite smile. A real one. That smile changed the room. The first week was not romantic or easy. It was awkward, tired, and full of small disasters. The roof leaked during an afternoon storm. The stove smoked. My truck refused to start. Mara woke from nightmares and pretended she had not. I found myself sitting outside at dawn, wondering what kind of man invites a frightened woman into his broken life and has no plan to save either of them. But slowly, something began to shift. Mara cleaned the windows and planted herbs in coffee tins. I repaired the porch and got the generator working. She cooked soup from almost nothing. I fixed a neighbor farmer's tractor and earned enough cash for groceries. We did not heal all at once. We healed in chores, in shared meals, in the quiet knowledge that neither of us had to be brave alone. Then Cauldron found us. It happened on a bright Wednesday afternoon. Mara was hanging sheets outside when the black sedan rolled up the dirt road like a bad memory returning with polished shoes. I was under the truck, my hands greasy, when I heard the car stop. Mara did not scream. She simply froze, one white sheet twisting in the wind between her hands. Cauldron stepped out smiling, but it was the kind of smile that makes the air colder. He said she had embarrassed the family. He said people were talking. He said she owed him respect, money, obedience, things no human being owes another. I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on a rag, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. For most of my life, I had avoided conflict until it swallowed me. I had let grief ruin my marriage, let debt take my home, let shame turn me into someone smaller. But when Cauldron reached for Mara's arm, something in me refused to shrink again. I told him to leave. My voice shook, but I said it. Mara stepped behind me, not because she was weak, but because she was tired of standing alone. Cauldron laughed and promised we would regret this. Then he drove away, throwing dust into the sunlight like smoke from a battlefield. That night, Mara packed her suitcase again. She said danger followed her and that I had already lost enough. I told her the truth then, the truth I had been hiding even from myself. I told her I had not saved her. She had saved me first. Before she said okay, I was just moving from one empty place to another. Now the cabin had warm food, clean windows, and someone who noticed when I went quiet. She sat on the porch steps while the evening turned purple, and for the first time since I had known her, she cried without apologizing. The next day, we went to town. Not to run, but to stand. Mara filed a report. She spoke to a legal aid woman named Safra Holt, who listened with fierce eyes and gave her options. I sold old tools to pay for paperwork and fuel. The farmer whose tractor I fixed gave me more work, then another man asked if I could repair his delivery van. Within a month, I was operating out of a barn with a hand-painted sign that read Voss Repairs. Mara began baking bread and selling it at the Saturday market. People came first for the bread, then returned for the woman who handed it to them with steady hands and a sunrise smile. But change is rarely clean. There were days when Mara still shook at unexpected noises. Days when I still stared at unpaid bills and felt failure breathing beside me. There were days we argued over nothing because fear wears many masks. Yet every time one of us wanted to disappear, the other made tea, opened a window, or sat nearby until the storm passed. Love did not arrive like fireworks. It arrived like daylight, slow and patient, touching one corner of the room at a time. By late autumn, the cabin no longer looked abandoned. Pumpkins sat near the porch. Fresh curtains moved in the breeze. The roof no longer leaked. The old sofa had a quilt over it that Mara stitched from clothes we could not bear to throw away. One square was from my father's work shirt. One was from the yellow dress she wore the day she said okay. We had taken pieces of pain and made them into something warm. The final test came on a clear morning at the courthouse. Cauldron stood across the hall, angry that his control had become evidence, angry that Mara's silence had finally ended. She held a folder in one hand and my sleeve in the other, but when her name was called, she let go of me. She walked into that room by herself. I watched her shoulders tremble, then straighten. She told the truth. Not perfectly. Not without tears. But fully. By the time she came out, she looked exhausted and free, like someone who had carried a mountain and finally set it down. That afternoon, we drove back under the same bright kind of sky that had watched us leave Rowan Street. Sunlight flashed over the windshield. Fields rolled past in gold and green. Mara opened the window and let the wind loosen her hair. She laughed suddenly, softly, and said it was strange how a joke had become a doorway. I told her maybe some jokes are prayers wearing foolish clothes. She looked at me then, and I knew both of us were thinking about the same impossible truth. Two broken people had not fixed each other, but they had given each other a place safe enough to begin. Near the end of that year, we returned to Rowan Street one last time. Not to live there. Not to mourn. Just to collect the few things Mara had left behind. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The fence between our old yards was still leaning, still waiting for repairs I had once promised to make. Mara stood in the sunlight, holding the key, and instead of unlocking the door right away, she turned to me and smiled. She said that for years she had watched me carry boxes, tools, grief, anger, and loneliness, never knowing that one day I would carry her suitcase too. I told her she had carried something heavier for me, hope. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a second chance, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Ancient Truth so more stories of kindness can reach the people who need them. Special request, comment, I still believe in kindness, if you stayed until this moment. 1 year after that strange afternoon, the cabin became a home people visited when their lives felt too heavy. My repair barn grew into a small workshop. Mara's bread became famous in 3 towns. On Saturdays, lonely people somehow found their way to our porch, and no one was ever allowed to leave hungry. Sometimes, when sunlight filled the yard and the sheets danced on the line, Mara would look at me with that quiet smile, and I would remember the exact second everything changed. I had meant to make a joke because I was too ashamed to admit I was scared. She had answered before I finished because she was too desperate to wait for a perfect invitation. And between my broken sentence and her brave okay, life opened a door neither of us knew was still there. So maybe kindness does not always arrive dressed like a miracle. Sometimes it arrives in a dusty truck at noon, with boxes in the back, a cracked heart behind the wheel, and one frightened neighbor brave enough to say yes before the sentence is finished.